Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our, Bruce, how many is this? Our 20th, 25th, 30th Senior Law Day webinar this year. Welcome from the Senior Law Day Collaborative. You've joined today to hear about the subject of end-of-life planning, and we're going to provide some education on legal advance directives and medical directive forms. So some pretty weighty stuff that's actually presented to us from the very knowledgeable and engaging Gretchen Flint. Gretchen is the Professor Emerita at Pace Law School, and she's also been a long-time member of the Senior Law Day Collaborative and a go-to resource for many of us on this important topic. So Gretchen, thank you very much for being here today. My name is Elena Falcone. I'm the Director of Public Innovation and Engagement at the Westchester Library System. And I am also a happy co-chair of the Senior Law Day Collaborative, because I'm happy co-chair because it means that we have a sort of a connection to bring this really powerful programming in through our 38 member libraries. My other co-chairs in this are Sarah Steckler from Keen and Bean and Melinda Bellis of Legal Services of Hudson Valley. Together with Bruce Siegel of Marketing Sense and the more than 150 professionals who volunteer their time to support the collaborative, we are delighted to be able to bring this program to you, and also to bring to you our website and our many other programs. I'm going to take just a second to share my screen and let me do this the right way, to share my screen and to show you our Senior Law Day website. Seniorlawday.info is a place that I hope you've got bookmarked. Many of you may have come to this program by registering at this site. Today we're going to be, given the topics that we're going to be talking about, the very first thing I want to point out is that there's a resources link at the top of the page. And we have something called the Elder Law Q&A. I'm going to come back to this resource at the end of the program as well. Many of the topics that we're addressing today are also covered in here, including directions to sample forms and a lot of what you need to refer to later. But let me go back a page. So on the main site, you see we have this expandy little tool here that tells you about how to register for the next webinar. Actually, the next webinar, I haven't yet put it up. Maybe I'll do it while this program is going on, but it's December, whoops, let me write down my notes, 2nd and 16th. Topics and registration links will be here. We also have coming up on December 10th, free consultations. So you can get a 15, 20-minute spot chatting one-to-one with a attorney, financial advisor, geriatric care manager, and other professionals that can answer the questions that you have in hand. So if you'd like to do that, come back to this website and register for these free consultations. Registration opens just a few hours the day before, so like around 3 p.m. on December 9th for the December 10th consultations. We can handle quite a few people, so please feel free to get your name in there and come talk to us. All of our past webinars, that's our most recent one, here goes, prior webinars, they are all hyperlinked over here. You can see the videos and get the presentation materials for all of these past programs. And I should do my run through. Yeah, it's well over 2 dozen. So I hope you'll take the time to come back and explore this website. All right, let me stop sharing. The site is not only a place where all of our work is collected, resources, webinars, and other things, and all of those wonderful registration links, but there was also an Ask Us button on there. Today, you have an opportunity to ask some questions during the webinar of Ms. Flint, but you also have the opportunity to, when the question comes up afterwards, go to that website, click on that Ask Us button, and you can shoot a question to us. And we'll have Ms. Flint or other professionals address that. We get back to you within 2 business days, not sooner. So that is what I want to tell you about the site. And I also want to then talk about this format, just as a reminder for you, this is being recorded with the aim of posting it to that wonderful website. It's usually available within 24 hours. You as participants are muted, but you do have a voice, because you can always use the Q&A button or the chat button that's at the bottom of your screen. If the chat is really for technical support, but the Q&A button will send a question to me, and Gretchen has graciously agreed that I can interrupt her periodically and say, Gretchen, there's a hot question right here. So please feel free to send those questions in. We may not be able to get to answer everyone's question that gets posted, but if you when you submit, if you allow us to include your email address in there, because you can also submit anonymously, we'll also do our best to get back to you afterwards. So we take your interest seriously. So please keep that in mind. With all of that, I think I've covered everything. I'm going to turn the screen over, or the attention over to Gretchen Flynn. And Gretchen, you may say hi and then go ahead and share your screen. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, thank you, and welcome everybody. I know you're out there. You can see me, but I can't see you, but I hope that you'll communicate with me via the chat, and I'm sure that Elena will send along the questions. So let me just start by saying what I'm going to really talk about two different things today. One is how we can all make plans to have our medical decisions made by somebody else when we don't have the ability to do that ourselves. And then I'm going to spend, after we've talked about that, I'm going to talk about what you can do if you're placed in the position of making medical decisions for somebody else. And obviously they're very much related. And when we get to the second part, we'll talk about how we hope that the person for whom you're making decisions has done the things that I'm going to suggest that you do when you decide who it is who's going to be stepping into your shoes should that need occur. Now, let me start out by saying that I'm going to be talking about New York law. Lawyers and law, most of it is state-based. The law in New Jersey is a little bit different than the law in New York, and the same for Connecticut and every other state. However, I will say that the general principles are the same. And if you do the kind of planning that I'm going to suggest that you do, and you sign the New York forms, if you happen to be in Florida for the winter and somebody needs to make decisions on your behalf, the New York forms will work. If you actually spend a lot of time in another state, I'm going to suggest that you also sign forms that are valid in that state, only because we want to make sure that when the time comes, the people who are going to be looking at these documents recognize them, understand what they mean, and it's always better if they're dealing with a form that looks familiar to them. But that being said, a New York form properly signed will be valid in another state. So let's start out with, most of us worry about what's going to happen if suddenly, or not so suddenly, we're no longer able to make decisions for ourselves. Maybe you've seen that happen with a family member, and you probably know that it can cause a lot of stress, a lot of tension. It's never easy, but we do have tools in New York that do two things. One, they allow you to make as many decisions ahead of time as you can. And two, it allows you to appoint a person to make decisions for you, and you can choose who that person is. And you have actually pretty broad, you have a lot of choices is what I'm going to say. So the good thing, right, to the extent that there's a good thing, is that we do have tools available to us. And these tools were designed to be easy to do. So I'm going to talk in a minute about the healthcare proxy form, which is the main form that we recommend that everybody sign. And you don't need a lawyer for that. It's designed for people to fill out on their own. You also don't need to track down a notary. All you need are 2 witnesses to watch you sign. So these forms were designed to be easy. You might not think they're as easy as they could be, but they're designed to be easy. And we're going to go over the forms so that if you want to fill them out, you know how to do it and you'll know how to do it right. Under other circumstances, when we have senior law day in person, usually I have law students with me who help people fill out the forms, but today Zoom is going to have to, we're going to have to do it this way. So let's talk about, what this form does and why everybody needs it, right? It's not just for the end of life, right? This form is for any time that a person doesn't have the ability to make healthcare decisions. It's only effective, it only works if the person isn't able to make healthcare decisions. As long as you can talk to your doctor and understand what the doctor is saying and make a choice based on, what that person is telling you about the pros and cons of treatment, that choice is up to you. You can be 110 years old, as long as you understand what the doctor is saying, you get to make those decisions. But sometimes it happens, and sometimes it happens to young people in addition to middle-aged people and old people, is that something happens and either temporarily or permanently, we're unable to actually make decisions because we can't understand what we're being told. And at that point, we need someone to step into our shoes, metaphorically, right? Talk to the doctor and then make a decision about what needs to be done, whether it's, whether to have a test, whether to have surgery, whether to have chemotherapy, whether to do other kinds of interventions. Somebody has to make the decision. The nice thing about the healthcare proxy is that you get to decide who makes the decision. And what you're deciding is, this is a person that I'm going to trust to talk to the doctor and then make a decision for me. If that person knows what you would want, they're required to make that decision. So if you've had the conversation about, a client once said to me, if the doctor doesn't think I'm going to get better within 30 days, I don't want to have any extraordinary measures. I don't want to be on a ventilator. But if the doctor thinks I might get better, then I would want that treatment. So if that person, I'm not the healthcare agent, I'm just the lawyer, but if the person had had that conversation with her agent, right? And then something happened, right? The person would know, okay, we're going to try this treatment for 30 days and then reassess, right? So that's an example where the agent knows what the person wants. And yes,
just a couple of questions. Who makes the call regarding the ability to actually make the decision? Do I say, I can't make this decision, I trust my daughter to do so? Or does my daughter make a determination? I don't think mom's thinking right.
Okay.
I'm going to decide.
Right. So it's actually the doctor. It's actually the doctor who decides that someone doesn't have the ability to make decisions anymore. And the person, the patient, I'll call the person the patient, has to be told. And if the patient disagrees and says, no, I want to make this decision, then the patient gets to make the decision. And if somebody disagrees with that decision, then they have to go to court, right? So there's people are often worried, and I understand that somebody's going to take away their decision-making rights, I'll call them that, prematurely, or are going to say, well, this person doesn't understand because they're making a decision that I disagree with, okay? And there are safeguards about that. And again, what's the test? Do you understand what the pros and cons are? And are you making a decision based on what you've been told? Okay, and people make decisions based on all sorts of things, including, their religious beliefs and their moral beliefs and what they think about, what is important in their lives. And we all have the right to do that, right? We all have the right to do that. And no one has the right to take that away from us as long as we can make the decision. And, okay.
A related question.
Yes.
Then you mentioned having the conversation. As you said, I know you said you're the attorney, but the nature of that conversation really is a big question that's here. Is in terms of if I'm not going to get better in 30 days, what does better constitute?
Well, exactly right. And that's the conversation that you want to have, right? So one thing that I suggest always is when you're looking to who to choose, that you choose somebody who knows you and who knows you well and who understands what your values are, right? And so there may be specific things that you can say, right? If I'm in a lot of pain, I would want lots of painkillers, and it doesn't matter if that might make me, sleepy or not fully engaged in the world. It's more important that I not be in pain. Or you might say the other thing is that I want to be interacting with my surroundings, and I can deal with pain. Don't feel like you have to drug me up just because I'm uncomfortable, right? Or you might say, I don't want to be on a respirator for the end of my life. I would rather have my life shortened than be hooked up to machines. So there might be specific things that you feel strongly about, but it's more about at the time, right? What's the doctor going to say? These are the advantages of this treatment. These are the disadvantages. And then you're asking your healthcare agent to say, okay, what would she want in this circumstance? And the thing is, none of us have the imagination. I mean, I don't have the imagination to think of all the bad things that could happen to me, right? Because I hope that none of them are going to happen to me. So we can't think of every single thing, right, that could possibly happen and then say, well, what would I want? Because we don't know. First of all, we don't know what kind of treatments are going to be available. We don't know what the pros and cons are. When somebody's, has a lot of things wrong with them, one more thing, they might not want to engage in that. Someone's healthy and one bad thing happens to them, they might want to choose to be treated. So we don't have a crystal ball. And it's more about making sure that your agent understands who you are and can figure it out when and if, right, the time comes. It was a very long-winded answer. Anything else, Elena?
Well, actually, someone, an attendee has also asked, COVID is a terrible disease. I don't want to go to a hospital and do want to be pain-free, have an easy end of life. How do I get it? So I think you're saying, have this conversation with someone who can represent you if you're not able to do that yourself. And I think they've just expressed that they don't want pain, etc. But it seems like there's more to that conversation. And I'm wondering if there is a script someplace, like the discussion points. Is it a chat with the chaplain, perhaps, or someone else who can guide that exploration?
Well, there are a couple of people who can be part of the conversation. The first is your doctor, right? Your doctor, and I know that not everybody has a doctor who's their regular doctor, but if you do, one of the things you want to be talking to your doctor about are these things, right? Only a doctor can prescribe pain medication, so you're going to need somebody on board to do that. As long as you can say, I don't want to go to the hospital, don't go to the hospital, don't call 911. It gets much trickier, obviously, when you're not in a position to do that and somebody who's with you, right, calls 911. And I'm going to get ahead of myself, but I'm going to do it anyway, right? That's so the rules about 911 are when 911 calls, they come, they do an assessment, and most of the time you end up going to the hospital. And if it's clear that you don't need to go to the hospital, right, maybe they won't take you. But if there's any chance, you're going to go to the hospital if 911 was called. If you're not in a position to even talk to 911 and somebody who's with you says, oh, no, she doesn't want to go to the hospital. She told me she doesn't want to go to the hospital. You might even say, I'm the healthcare agent. Here's the form. Too bad. It doesn't work. Okay. Because there needs to be an assessment, and that, the EMS people can't do that. There is a form, however, that's called a non-hospital DNR. But that's the form that if not you, but if someone shows it to EMS, they will not start resuscitation. There's also a form called the MOLST form, which stands for Medical Orders for Life-Sustaining Treatment. And that's something that you fill out with your doctor. And one of the choices on that form is, I don't want to go to the hospital. So you can do that, but it takes planning on your behalf, by you or by your healthcare agent, and the cooperation of your doctor. However, that's why we're having this conversation, so that you can put this in place. Because if you wait until you're sick, right, or you wait until, somebody, right, calls 911, it's going to be too late, okay? It's going to be too late to avoid going to the hospital. You might be able to get yourself out of the hospital, but you're not going to prevent that ambulance ride, which is really what you're talking about, which is what you really want to do.
So I can see that we're very focused on COVID in this, and concerned that we may not have been able to get certain paperwork in place beforehand. Someone asks, can I record via audio or video and give it to my proxy to deliver as and when needed? So does it have to be the form, or can it be a recording? I think it's a clever question.
Okay, so there are two things. All right, so there are two different things, and let me talk to them. So the form, right, is just that. It's a form, and it's saying, I am appointing this person to be my healthcare agent. And if you fill it out, and we'll talk about how to do that in a minute, right? That's a legal document. That's a legal document. People have to pay attention to it. And one of the things that they have to do is they have to pay attention to what the agent is saying about what to do. If there is no form, right? If there is no form, then what your wishes are, right? Especially if you have documented them in some way, or express them in some way, your wishes have to be honored. So let's say you haven't appointed an agent, right? And you end up in the hospital. There is a law that says that certain people can make decisions for you. If you're married, your spouse gets priority. And then it'll be your adult children, one of your adult children, and then brothers and sisters and grandchildren, and so on and so forth. And that person, as long as you're in the hospital, which is probably not where you want to be, but if you're in the hospital or a nursing home or in hospice, the law gives that person decision-making authority. And that recording, right, when your sister, I'll just say, says, no, don't do that. I know that's not what she wants. And the doctor says, well, how do you know? You have the recording, right? You have the recording, you have something you've written, right? So that's kind of the backup, right? And certainly you can, write stuff down, but it's also okay just to talk to somebody. It's just okay to talk to your agent or your friend or your sister, your husband, whoever it is, and say, this is what I want. This is how I'm feeling about this. I really, if I get sick, I don't want to go to the hospital, even if the doctor is saying I might get better, right? I don't want to be on a respirator, even if there's some chance I might get better. Or you might say, yeah, I want to get, I want to beat this, I want everything to be done. So I don't want to suggest that we're always saying we don't want everything. Most people want something, but not when it, so much that it feels kind of crazy, right? And that's a long conversation that you need to have, even though, right? I'll be the first to say, even though it's a hard conversation.
I want to allow you to get back on track, but so we'll close with this one other question. How often do you need to update the proxy? Some providers, I'm not sure what providers request yearly updates. And I know you were going to show us the document as well. So I'll,
Yeah, not necessary. Okay. So ask the doctor, when did you go to law school? No, just kidding. Just kidding. They don't have to be updated. They last forever unless you say this is going to expire at such a time. I never recommend that you say that, because why? We never know what's going to happen, that we're going to lose the ability to make decisions. So now you can update it anytime. So you appoint your best friend to be your agent and she moves to Australia. Okay, right? There are telephones, there's email, right? But you might want another friend who actually lives down the block, or even, lives in Connecticut, right? To be your agent. So you're able to change it anytime. What you want to do is rip up the old one and do a new one. And if there are two, right? So two people show up at the hospital. The person who has the form that's dated later is the one who is going to be listened to. So I'm going to say in a moment that I want you to make a bunch of copies when you can actually make copies, right? But if you don't get all the old copies, don't worry about it, because the new agent, the one with the form that was dated last week or last month, is going to be the decision maker, not the person who has a form that you signed 5 years ago. Okay. How are we doing? Any more questions?
No, we're good now. Now you can get back on track.
Okay, let me get back on track. All right, let's take a look at this form. Now, okay, here I found it, and I'm going to share my screen through the miracles of technology. Share. Okay. Elena, you can see the form? Okay, good. All right. So this is the form. In the Elder Law Q&A, there's a copy of this form, but you can also get it on the health department website. And Elena, maybe you'll put the link in the chat, but truthfully, the way I find it is I Googled New York healthcare proxy form, and you get it. And then I'm just looking at the form, but there are also 6 pages of information and instruction, which you can read, right? You can read if you want. But let's just look at the form, and we can see both what you need to fill out and what the things are you need to know. So the first thing is you put your name in here, and then you appoint a person, one person. Okay, the law says you can only have one person at a time acting as your healthcare agent. Why is that? Because the hospital doesn't want to deal with all of your children. The hospital only wants to deal with one person at a time. That's probably not what you want. Most people say, well, I have 2 children, I don't want to choose, or I want them to make the decision together. I get that. I understand that, but you have to choose for this. And you write in their name, their address, and their phone number, all of their phone numbers. However, they're, whatever phone numbers they can get tracked down by. Because remember, you're not going to be in a position to say, oh yeah, well, try his girlfriend, right? Because you wouldn't need your healthcare agent if you could do that. So think about, if somebody needed to find my agent, how are they going to do that? And then you can put in an alternate agent. So that's where you've got your other children, right? And you can do more than one, just they need to be in order. So I would say if you're going to put in more than one, you put number 1 and the person's name, address, and phone number, and then number 2, right? And you can do as many as you want. The form doesn't look like you can, but you can. And again, good idea to have alternates. Your main agent might be, not findable, when they're needed, and it would be a good idea to have somebody else. Okay, now we get down to number 3, which says, unless I revoke it or state an expiration date, this proxy shall remain in effect indefinitely. Right, so if your healthcare provider says, oh no, you need to fill out a new one, if you have the old one, you just say, look, it says it remains in effect indefinitely. It's still what I want. Okay, don't let anybody bully you and make you do something that you don't have to do. I do not recommend saying it's going to expire, after I wake up from surgery, right? Because something might happen in a week or a month or a year. If you want to change it, just fill out a new form. Don't put yourself in the position of not having an agent to take care of what needs to be taken care of. Okay, so now we come down to directions, right? So here, there's only one thing that I recommend that everyone write in here. This is not to place the thing to say, if I'm not going to wake up in 30 days, I don't want tube feeding or whatever. The only thing that I think you should put in here is to say, my agent and alternate agent know my wishes, considering artificial nutrition and hydration. Don't say, I always want tube feeding, I never want tube feeding, because that's a limitation. But what you do need to say, because this is a weird thing about New York law, I promise I won't say that too many more times, but the weird thing about New York law is your healthcare agent can decide whether or not you're going to be on a respirator. Your healthcare agent can decide whether or not you're going to get CPR, but your healthcare agent cannot make decisions about tube feeding unless your agent knows what you want. So the best way to do that is, of course, you're going to have the conversation, but you're just going to say on the form, my agent knows my wishes. That way, right, the form says my agent can't make these decisions for me. What if you forget? What if you already had a form and it doesn't say that? Your agent will still have the opportunity to talk to your healthcare provider and say to your healthcare provider, I had the conversation and I know this is what she wants. But much better if it's clear on the form, and then there'll be less conversation about, well, how do you know? How do you know that it was, this situation? There's a very famous, notorious case in New York before the healthcare proxy law, where the patient's daughter said, she told us she didn't want tube feeding because she watched her brother die of cancer, and the doctor said, but she doesn't have cancer, she had a stroke. That doesn't count, right? And actually the court said that doesn't count because she wasn't talking about something that happened to her. So the law's changed since then, that's the good news. But as long as it says on your form that your agent knows your wishes, that's enough. And again, you don't have to, that's the good news, right? You don't have to think of every possible bad thing that could happen to you and what treatment you would want in the circumstance. Okay, so that's that. Then this is where you sign. You write your name, you sign, you put your address, and you write the date. Why is the date important? So we know which is the last one that has been signed. Now, you also have the opportunity to consent to organ donation. This has nothing to do with healthcare. Everybody understands that, but if you haven't already decided and it's not on your driver's license, or even if it is and you want to make a donation of your organs after you die, you can write this down. You don't have to do it. You don't have to do it. But if you want to, you can. And then this is the important part. You need to sign it in front of 2 witnesses. And that's hard right now, right? That's hard to find 2 people. And the witnesses can't be your agent or your substitute agent. So you're going to have to, find 2 friends and meet them in the park, and have them watch you sign, and then sign where it says, yes, Elena.
How has this been done during COVID when you can't get your 2 friends to come in to see you? Like, so
Well,
this is the last minute thing.
People are doing it in the park. People are doing it in the park. There is a way. I mean, lawyers are doing remote signing. The law actually allows us to get everybody on Zoom and watch and email stuff back and forth, or fax. It's a little complicated. My recommendation would be, before it gets too cold and you want to do this, find a couple friends and see them outside for 5 minutes, and do it that way.
Your recommendation is to do this now and not later.
Well, don't wait till it snows. Absolutely. Wait till, find a warm day and, find 2 friends and do it outside.
Don't wait until you're in a hospital or grievously ill.
Absolutely.
This is really about advanced planning.
This is absolutely about advanced planning, and COVID makes it just harder. But, it's not snowing. It's cold today, but it's not snowing. So I would say, try to find 2 people who are willing to meet you outside and do it. Or there may be somebody in your household who's not the agent, right? They could be witnesses. Okay. Any questions about the form before I move on?
No, but I've been feeding them to you as they've come in.
Okay, good. All right. So what else do we want to talk about in terms of the healthcare proxy? Who can be your agent, right? So it's who can be, who should be. Any person over 18 can be your agent. That doesn't mean that any person should be your agent, but any person can be your agent. It doesn't have to be your spouse. It doesn't have to be your sister. It doesn't have to be anybody in particular. It should be a person who is A, willing to do it, and B, will advocate for you and advocate for what you want.
So the person who just asked the question, can I ask a doctor and nurse to sign as witnesses? Are those appropriate?
They can be witnesses, absolutely. So I thought the question was going to be, can my doctor be my healthcare agent? And that's a more complicated, there's a more complicated answer to that. Yes, except if your doctor then has to become your agent, she can't be your doctor anymore. And most people, if they have a doctor that they like enough to want them to be their healthcare agent, they actually want them to be their doctor. So I would say don't make your doctor your agent unless you really don't have another choice. It's much better if you have a good doctor to have that person be your doctor, right? The other thing is that there's a rule that somebody can't be a healthcare agent for, I think it's more than 10 people, unless they're related to them. So sometimes, the people have, there's a social worker at the senior center who people, love, and they love, the social worker loves them. And, if they don't have anyone else to be the agent, the social worker will say, well, I can be your agent. Well, it can't be for too many people. Okay. That's the only other limitation. But most of the time, right, you shouldn't be paying anybody to be your healthcare agent. The whole idea is that this is somebody who knows you, that you have a personal relationship with, and who's going to advocate for you.
That makes a lot of sense. I do want to make sure we have time to cover the MOLST, because I know that's the most challenging of the documents, I think, to even conceive of.
Okay. So, all right. So I think I've covered pretty much what I wanted to talk about the healthcare proxy. Again, what you're doing is you're giving somebody the ability to make decisions for you. And the communication about what you want happens with the healthcare agent and not with, and not on the piece of paper. Okay, there are a couple of other documents I'm going to talk about really quickly because I see that running out of time here. I talked about the non-hospital DNR, which stands for Do Not Resuscitate. In New York, another slightly odd thing about New York is that a doctor, right, there cannot be a decision not to resuscitate someone when their heart stops unless there's been consent, unless somebody has agreed, either themselves, if they have the ability to do that, or the healthcare agent or a family member. So the doctor signs the DNR. Maybe you've had the experience of going to the hospital or having a relative in the hospital, and the doctor's had a conversation with you about if her heart stops, you know, do you want us to try to restart it? And I hope that the conversation included, you know, what's the likelihood of actually that working and so on. But you can't on your own say, I don't want to have CPR. The doctor has to write an order, and usually it's in the hospital. And then for somebody who's at home, right, and who's seriously ill and decides that they don't want to have their EMS try to restart their heart if it stops, there's the document that's called the non-hospital DNR. Again, a doctor has to sign that, and that's in the elder law Q&A. That's one of the forms in the elder law Q&A. And if that's something that you're interested in, you should be talking to your doctor about, either for yourself or for you know, someone you're taking care of. The MOLST form.
But that's a hospital DNR, just to be clear, the non-hospital and the hospital, how do you make
There are two forms. There are two forms. Okay. The hospital DNR, that is effective while somebody's in the hospital or in a nursing home. Once somebody goes home, right, and many people decide that, you know, they want to be home for whatever time they have left and they don't want to go to the hospital, it's very important to have your doctor sign the non-hospital DNR so that if somebody, you know, panics and calls 911, then the EMTs have to abide by what the non-hospital DNR says.
But the general understanding might be that that's when you're in hospice, but not everyone necessarily is compelled to be part of hospice. Okay.
You don't have to be in hospice. Probably if somebody is in hospice, there's a non-hospital DNR, because generally that's what being in hospice means, is you don't want any interventions. But you could not be in hospice. You could just be at home and decide that, you know, if your heart stops, you know, you're fine with that, and that's the end. And again, it's important because if somebody calls 911, they're going to try to restart your heart unless you have the non-hospital DNR. All right, now I'm going to talk about MOLST. So MOLST is it's a 4-page document. It's if you have one in you know, in paper form, it's bright pink, about the color of Elena's hair. And why is it bright pink? So that the doctors can find it in the record. Now, of course, now all those records are electronic, and that's a different thing. But anyway, the MOLST, what it's supposed to do is that it documents all of the advanced directives that have been made, both in writing and also orally. So it's for people who either have a chronic disease or who are at the end of life. And the idea is, let's have this piece of paper that documents all the decisions that have been made. Who's the healthcare agent? is there a DNR order? Under what circumstances does the person want to be hospitalized? And that's that piece of paper, or that, file in the chart, let's put it that way, is supposed to document all of those decisions. This is a form that you fill out with your doctor, or it could be a nurse or a social worker. If you could you can have it filled out for yourself, right? Or if you're the healthcare agent for someone, you really should be talking to that person's doctor about making sure everything is documented on the MOLST form. Again, this is. Yeah,
did you want to stop sharing the healthcare proxy form and bring up
so
the other one?
Oh, I'm so sorry.
Oh, no, just a reminder. You've been answering all our questions.
All right, let me see if I can.
And someone wanted to know, what's the name of this form? Again, it's a MOLST, and
Yeah,
what does that stand for?
Okay, it stands for, let's see if I can remember, medical orders for life-sustaining treatment.
And you're getting a lot of appreciative comments for making this challenging information accessible. Just want to let you know.
Oh, great. Okay, so this is from the Elder Law Q&A, which you can download from the Senior Law Day website. And as I say, this is not bright pink, but this is the form.
It's on page 103. There we go.
There we go. Okay, so so here, section A, it says resuscitation instructions when the patient has no pulse or is not breathing. Check 1. CPR should be attempted. There's a DNR order that says do not attempt resuscitation. Section B, right? Then the person has to check. It has to sign, the person who has authority to make that decision. It could be the patient, the healthcare agent, the surrogate under the public health law, and so on. Then the doctor has to sign. Then it says, are there advance directives? Check all that we know about. Is there a healthcare proxy? Is there a living will, organ donation, documentation of oral advance directives? That's where either you have written down what you want, or you've talked to the doctor who's written it in the notes, right? I had a conversation about blah, 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 right?
But just to be clear, this is not replacing those documents. It is indicating that the documents exist. So there's a packet that needs to be someplace. Okay.
Right. This is saying, we know there's a healthcare proxy, or we know that there's a living will. We know that there's a document that has said that this person wants to donate their organs. Then the patient signs it. And then there's some other things that, again, you're going to be discussing with your doctor or the person who's helping you with this form. And then, so here you can say, you want only comfort measures. People decide that, sometimes at the end of life, that they don't want a lot more interventions. And anyway, all of these things, here you have the opportunity to say you don't want to be intubated ever, or you would be intubated for a trial period, or you would want to be intubated for, as long as you live. Here's the opportunity for deciding about hospital, right? Do not send to the hospital unless pain or severe symptoms cannot be controlled. Send to hospital if necessary based on the MOLST order. Here again, an opportunity to document your views about artificial nutrition and hydration, antibiotics, and so on. Most of the time, let me just say one thing. This is appropriate for people who either have a chronic illness or are at the end of life. If you're perfectly healthy, you're not going to be deciding about whether or not you want antibiotics, because you probably do, right? If you want to get better. But the nice thing, I mean, the idea behind this form and the nice thing about it is in one place, right? In one four-sided pink form, you have all of the documentation of the wishes that you have. It needs to be updated periodically. This does need to be updated. And again, this is not something you do on your own. This is something that you do in consultation with your doctor, your healthcare provider.
Not with your lawyer necessarily.
And not with your lawyer. No,
right.
Your lawyer, unfortunately, all your lawyer can do is say, you need to talk to your doctor about this.
So your hierarchy is everyone should have a healthcare proxy form. So you should have talked about your wishes with somebody. And if you happen to have a chronic illness or at the end of life, this is another thing that you need, that you're advising to work through. And that's Absolutely. Where the DNRs come in too. Right,
that's where the DNRs, because again, the healthcare proxy, that's between, you and your lawyer, or you and your loved ones, right? The MOLST, the DNR orders, you need to bring your doctor in on those things. Let me just say a couple more things. I didn't talk about living wills at all, excuse me. But what a living will is a document that you sign that expresses your wishes at the end of life. Most living wills, and truthfully, they're pre-printed forms, and there's a form in the Elder Law Q&A you can look at. There are a couple of things you should know. First of all, some lawyer drafted that. It may or may not express your wishes, and you want to make sure that it does. And generally what the living wills say is, if I have less than 6 months to live, or I'm permanently unconscious, or I'm minimally conscious, but I can't make decisions, and I'm never going to be able to make decisions, I don't want any treatment except for pain. So the forms say, I don't want artificial nutrition and hydration. I don't want to be tube fed. I don't want to be on a respirator. I don't want CPR. And a lot of them also say, I don't want antibiotics. Not everybody thinks that. You might say, I wouldn't want to be on a respirator, but I would want tube feeding. Somebody might think that, right? Somebody might say, yeah, I don't want to be on a respirator. I don't want to have tube feeding, but if I have an infection, I would want antibiotics, right? So before you sign one of those, you need to make sure it expresses your wishes, and you're free to cross stuff out or change it or whatever. It gets signed the same way as the healthcare proxy. But think of it as instructions, right? It's much better to have a person who can be evaluating what the doctor is saying and making a decision based on that than having a piece of paper that you signed when you were probably healthy, right? And that isn't taking in account what your actual condition is. Yeah.
There's a question here that's actually an interesting, it just came up to two ways. So looking at the living will, there one question, I'll read it directly, is would you say this is on the edge of euthanasia?
No.
Yeah.
No.
I didn't think so either.
Okay. So euthanasia is illegal in this country. And euthanasia is when somebody else decides to end somebody's life, right? In this country, we all have the ability, the authority to refuse treatment for ourselves, right? And as long as we know what we're doing, right? As long as we know what we're doing. And we agree to do that. And many people, not everybody, many people think that there might be some time in their life when they just as soon not be kept alive artificially because they're not interacting with their environment, they don't recognize their loved ones, whatever it is. But that's an individual choice that you have. And you can delegate that decision to somebody through a healthcare proxy. Right, you have to tell that person what you want. The living will, again, and there are people who feel this way, that if they're not going to get better, and they're going to die soon, right? With or without intervention. They'd rather not have the intervention. But not everybody feels that way. And my own view, I'll tell you just my lawyer view, is it's much better to appoint a healthcare agent who can make the decision in the moment. If you want to sign a living will, don't staple it to your healthcare proxy. Give it to your healthcare agent in case there's some pushback from somebody who either you haven't had the conversation with, or, you know, there's always somebody, right? There's always somebody in the family who says, no, 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 I know she would want, you know, something that actually is not true, right? Everybody, you know, there's somebody in every family, and think of the living will as kind of insurance in case that happens.
So given that you've covered these three key end-of-life documents, do you want to take a couple of questions that are sort of tangential to sort of end-of-life decision-making, or is there another one?
Absolutely. I'm happy to.
So on the same subject, how does one get the Oregon end-of-life treatments?
Well, I think you have to move to Oregon, okay? So in New York, physician-assisted death is not legal. There's an organization that's called End of Life Choices New York that's been working really hard for several years trying to get a law that would allow a person who's terminally ill to obtain a prescription from a doctor for medication that would end that person's life. There is a law in Oregon and I don't know, 9 other states, something like that. In New York, it's not legal, so you can't do it. You can't do it in New York. You can't ask your doctor for, you know, a prescription for pills that will end your life. I'm not fully familiar with what you would have to do if you wanted to go to Oregon and do that. I think you have to become an Oregon resident. You know, nobody wants people doing this on a, you know, as tourists.
I think there are 9 states, or is it 12
states
who are now participating in.
Exactly.
In that.
But I believe that in most states you actually have to be a resident, which doesn't mean you couldn't move there, but you can't do it in New York at the moment.
Another question here is, if you have a proxy and your agent knows your wishes, do you even need to have a living will?
Well, no, you don't. You don't.
Right.
If your agent knows your wishes, and if you have on the proxy that your agent knows your wishes about artificial nutrition and hydration, then you don't need a living will. And I'll just say this again, maybe I wasn't clear. The living will only applies, right, after a doctor has said you only have 6 months to live, or you're in a permanently unconscious state. And doctors are very reluctant to, you know, say that. Nobody, you know, they always say, well, I can't predict how long, you know, you might live, right? So you don't want to limit necessarily your agent's authority by, you know, depending on a doctor to say the conditions of the living will have come into effect.
Thank you. So I have 2 more questions, and then I think we'll have to call it a wrap.
Okay.
One person asked, and I answered, but I think I need you to answer it. Does the Senior Law Day Collaborative have a position on the proposed medical aid in dying bill? And since we're not an advocacy organization, my answer was no.
I don't believe so. I not as far as I know. Let's put it that way.
But are there organizations in Westchester County and New York State who you think are resources for understanding more about this?
Right. So it's called End of Life Choices New York. And if you Google it, I believe you will find their website.
Okay.
And they have webinars, they have, you know, back in the day when we could get, you know, together in person, they would have conferences and so on and so forth. So they're really the go-to organization for New York. And then there's a national organization has a similar name. But again, it really, if you find the New York organization, they'll be happy to, you know, give you everything you need to know.
That'll be the gateway. So then this is the one that's a little bit tangential particularly, but it certainly relates. My wife does not want a funeral and wants to be cremated. how do I get her body out of the place of death and to the crematorium? So that speaks to the whole process that happens when death occurs, particularly at home or
Right. Okay.
anywhere else.
Right. Okay. So in New York, the next of kin is the person who has the legal authority to make arrangements after death. So as long as the husband or wife is on board with the wishes, they get to do it, right? Sometimes what happens is that the person is afraid that their relatives are going to ignore their wishes and have a funeral anyway, or have an in-ground burial rather than cremation. So there's a form, and I believe it's in the elder law Q&A, that is something that someone signs that says, these are my wishes concerning the disposal of my remains after death. And that has legal, that's legal, right? So I suggest that if there's, any doubt in your mind about your relatives carrying out your wishes, that you sign this form. The other thing is that you can make arrangements in advance, obviously, and when it's done and paid for, there's probably a good chance that your wishes will be carried out. But the form, and
I was just frantically Googling in the elder law Q&A. It seems that our statement is that it's in the will is where we advise you to do that. So where else would we look?
Okay, so let me just see if there's, you can put it in the will, but you don't have to. And lawyers disagree sometimes about whether doing it in the will is a good thing. I often will put these arrangements in the will because then you only have one piece of paper you're worrying about, one document you're worrying about. But yeah, I'm not quickly seeing it.
The page 24 is where we talk about the will. So it sounds like it's something we need to add.
Yes. So I will find you the document. Let me just make sure. Yeah, I don't see it here, and I guess I can stop my share. But anyway, there is I promise you there is a document, and I guess if you want to, the person who's asking the question, if you want to add your email address to send your email address to Elena, we can get you the link to the form.
That would be fabulous. Oops, did I just lose myself? Here we go.
Okay.
Oh,
is that you or me?
That was me this time, but I actually want to stop the share. The person who did ask that, they did not give me their email address. So it would be really important to go to the website, seniorlawday.info, and put in your question in the Ask Us button, or quickly do so here so I can make sure I have your email. I am going to just share my screen for a second because you were showing off our wonderful website where we have the elder law Q&A, which so I'm going to make sure I go here, show you again where it is. This is the home page for the Senior Law Day site. When you go to resources, you can drop down to our 2020 webinars, some fabulous, since I made it, brochure on essential online health information, and the elder law Q&A, which all of our expertise sort of pours into. And why I want to show this document off is that we've given a lot of thought to how to organize it. And once you get to the table of contents, it is fully hyperlinked. And if you want to jump, let's say, to the MOLST form on page 103, you click on 103 and you can start reading that. And at the bottom of every page, you can jump back up to the table of contents. It takes a lot of work to do that in a PDF document, just want to say. So it's a very useful tool, and we've really tried to anticipate a lot of your needs. Gretchen, there's been such wonderful comments coming in about how this was helpful for so many people, and I just want to thank you for your time and expertise. It's certainly been well received, and we get to post this on our website so others can see it.
Okay, well, thank you. It's been fun. I'm sorry that I'm sorry that I couldn't see everybody, but I hope at some point in the future we'll be seeing each other in person at Senior Law Days. So,
Yay. And Bruce, I know you wanted to take over and make sure we give a couple of acknowledgments. If folks would stay for a second, because we have something we want to ask you to do.
Yeah, so I just thank you, Elena. This has been amazing. I just want to give a quick acknowledgement to our sponsors here, including Elena's organization, the Westchester Library System. We had to go, as we've alluded to, completely virtual after March, and we only were able to do that through all of these folks right here. So thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Bye, everyone.